So you've sold your house. What the hell do you do now? Great question. We want to talk through today some options that you do have and a journey that I've been through myself. Firstly, who is a real estate trader? Oi, oi. Now, congratulations to you. You've managed to sell a property. That's fantastic. It's easier said than done. It's much more stressful than people ever make out. And yeah, well done. The problem is you had a problem which you think you've solved, but you've now created another problem. So when it's like, okay, I want to sell this house, you get in touch with the agent, you market the property, you have a price target, you hopefully get your price target. Dreamland, you get a bidding war. Hell, you get no interest whatsoever, and whatever the case might be. The next problem, though, let's say you've actually completed this, as the title suggests, you've got some money. What are you going to do with it? Well, the first step I would go through is understand what is your goal. Without setting that first, there's just no point having any other discussion. And the things that I would like to chat through are, what is your net wealth? And what is the money you've received from the sale of this house as a proportion of the rest of your assets? And with that in mind, it's like, okay, well, how do you most effectively allocate all of this money into areas that suit you the best? Your age is a big factor. I'm 35. The asset allocation that I take as a 35-year-old is going to be very different to someone who's 65, for example. And that's totally fair enough. A 65-year-old will trust different things. They'll have their retirement in the back of their mind around the corner, and their risk profile is different as a result. The key to all this, though, is once you understand what the goal is, you can set a strategy to get there. And once you put that strategy in place, that then guides you with future situations. Just an example is your strategy. I want to buy another house. You buy it in an area where you think the price is pretty good, and 5 years later the property is decreased in value. And it's like, oh shit. Was like, okay, well, was it for a 5-year hold or a 10-year hold? And is that property still on a beach in a nice neighborhood? Yes and yes. Okay, well, actually, maybe you should buy another property. The point is you set the strategy and you try and stick to it. Now, a key difference to understand is something that's not that obvious, but what's the difference between investing and saving? Well, a very big difference, it turns out. The status quo financial system that we've grown up in is dominated by inflationary monetary theory. This means that the money that we get given for, when we sell something, the US dollars, the British pounds, the Aussie dollar, whatever you might be using, that is a potential savings tool. But because of the inflationary monetary policy, it erodes in purchasing power over time. So if you want to hold purchasing power, you have to move out of cash. You cannot just save, and you have to take risk. You have to invest. Now, the way I really like to think of this is capital is an all-encompassing phrase for, let's just call it monetary energy in a sense. So you have capital, you have relationship capital, you have monetary capital, you have a number of different types of capital. This is not a discussion about that in depth, more just as a capital allocator. You will want to own assets that offset the erosion of purchasing power in cash and also give you some kind of capital growth, capital protection, etc. Point is, you can't just save the cash you've been given in the bank from that house sale, providing you have a 5 to 10 year view, because that's just going to lose purchasing power over time. So in a sense, you're forced to invest. But when you invest, how long is your investment tied up for? How much risk are you actually taking? It's very hard to be an investor, to actually understand the risk that you're taking by buying bonds or buying equities or buying more real estate. And a key characteristic that I've really underestimated in the past is liquidity. Being able to sell when you want is a huge, huge factor. To summarize, investing and saving are very different. Do not think of an investment as a savings account, because sometimes you can't get the money out. Sometimes the investment will fail. There's a number of different reasons why I think that's the case. Now, what assets can you own? Okay, well, I've touched on a few of them already. Equities, bonds, real estate, classic cars, art, music, you name it. There's anything essentially that you can own. But the point is some things are better than others. Now, I talk a lot about the different characteristics of money, whether it's divisible or durable or portable, etc. That makes certain types of money better than others. The truth is, real estate is currently being used as a type of money. People flip houses without doing anything to them with the denominating dollar sign that's apparently gone up. It's a really, really difficult concept to get your head around, but we will do so. We will do that over the course of this presentation. So the point is, you can own whatever you want. You can take that money from that house and you can buy whatever you want. But what you want to think about is some of the characteristics of the assets that you're buying. And ultimately, you want both capital protection and capital growth. Now, if you're enjoying this presentation, I'd really appreciate a like. YouTube loves it for their algorithm. Now, as a Bitcoin advocate, I will always say to someone who's just sold a house, why don't you reallocate into Bitcoin? And there's also, there's always all sorts of different things they'll say why that's not possible and they shouldn't do it and blah, blah, blah. But I'm here to try and change that. Now, in my opinion, Bitcoin has an excellent blend of characteristics when it comes to different areas that you can put your capital. So Bitcoin is money. Bitcoin is a savings technology. It's liquid the entire time, and you're able to store it in self-custody, which is a property right I will go into later. That it's a huge step change. But if I can get capital protection from Bitcoin and I can get capital growth from Bitcoin and it's liquid the whole time, that's a very, very interesting place to look to deploy your capital from a recently sold house. Now, I would also really encourage people, we go back to that holistic view of wealth. It's like, get off zero. You've just sold this property. If that's your entire investable assets, 1%, 2%, 5%, get it into Bitcoin. Get off zero. The potential for Bitcoin to take off is the best asymmetric bet I know. The best asymmetric bet. Many traders that have got vast amounts more experience than I have will also say the same thing. But the key is also skin in the game, right? It's like you're watching a horse race and you see that you'd pick the jockey with the pink colors because you think it's funny or it's got a stupid name, and you don't care anything about the horse race generally. But then suddenly you're cheering this thing on because it's like, oh my god, it's going to win. You've got skin in the game. Bitcoin's the same. So get off zero and get skin in the game. Now, where is value? And this is the step that, as investors, you've got to take a view. You've got to have an opinion. Where is value? And frankly, capital allocation is extraordinarily hard at the moment. So the bond market's in turmoil, the equity market's not growing, and the general stasis seems to be, we're in a recession. Stagflation has arrived, right? High inflation, but low growth in assets. Difficult time to be an asset allocator. If I was working for someone taking their 1% and trying to make money, it's a very difficult time to do your job. And they'll all talk about risk reduction and diversification and all the rest of it. But I think Bitcoin just does this all day of the week. And why? Value in scarcity. So another way of describing Bitcoin is digital scarcity. This is a once in a history phenomenon, is the invention of digital scarcity. Before Bitcoin, you could just copy paste. Now, because of solving the Byzantine generals problem and creating decentralized consensus, the Bitcoin network is digital scarcity. And that's where I'm parking my money. That's what I think is interesting. Now, I touched on this earlier, but why is inflation a problem? So you just sold your house. Way, happy days. Well done. You probably made some money in the last 5 years. Have you? Inflation is very insidious because it makes the denominating metric of everything we own appear to be going up. So everyone's houses are going up in price. Oh my God, everyone's making money. But are they? And this is where I encourage you to really think about purchasing power. If you take, let's say you've been paid 500,000 Australian dollars for a real estate asset that you owned. If you take that 500 grand and you buy another property with it, well, you're going to have to pay some stamp duty to the government. You're going to have to pay some agent's fees on the way through. Then you're going to have ongoing costs. Now, whether or not you rent it out and get some yield, or you live in it yourself, you might have debt costs. There's OPEX with it, right? So you need that property to go from $500,000 in value up to 700 grand just to cover the friction costs of trading between real estate assets. People don't really talk about this too much. Point being, the inflationary nature of the status quo financial system, it makes it feel like you're making money. But the real question is, has your purchasing power increased over time? And I would argue that buying and selling real estate is a very good way of actually losing capital over time, because the capital growth isn't high enough to justify all the friction cost in between. And then equally, it's like, what are you missing out on? What's the opportunity cost of not owning Bitcoin? And that's the hurdle rate people must consider. It's like, okay, if I don't buy this and I buy Bitcoin instead, I might make X. If I buy this and don't buy Bitcoin, what's it got to do in order to outperform Bitcoin? Anyway, to summarize, I like the phrase, it's easier to fool a man than to explain to a man they've been fooled. Think about that for a moment. In relation to the monetary system that we live within, everything around us, oh my God, it's getting more expensive, getting more expensive. No, the dollar value is decreasing. Big, big difference. I want to talk a bit here about property rights. And when you own some real estate, you get the deeds or whatever, or the title to 200 square meters. Let me use my example. So I owned a property here in Melbourne, 200 square meters of land within the state of Victoria, within Australia. And it's essentially a piece of paper from a government saying, I grant you the ability to reside on this premise. And then we trade these pieces of paper between each other as if they are physical properties. Now, I'm going to argue that Bitcoin in self-custody is the highest form of property right humans have ever had access to. You own Bitcoin, you get it in self-custody. Only you, with the key, can move it. And because of the nature of Bitcoin's design, it cannot be debased. So the government could easily say, you can have this piece of paper and lock it up in such a way that, no one can ever get it. Maybe they could do that. I don't think it's possible, but they could then, sell tons more of them, right? That idea of debasement is very difficult to get your head around initially. The point is, though, okay, fine. I want to bang on about property rights. Bitcoin changes property rights. It is also true, though, that you cannot live in a Bitcoin. So property does have some value, but I would argue that a lot of what you see in real estate all over the world is actually a monetary premium. So people are owning properties because of using them as store of value. They're not actually using them because they want to live in them. And so at some point, that monetary premium, I believe, will be sucked out of the real estate market by Bitcoin specifically. And so that would concern me about buying real estate again, if that's what you're thinking of doing. Thank you for listening today. I'd love to know what's stopping you. Why won't you reallocate into Bitcoin? 1%, 2%, 5%, whatever the case might be. Comment below with your questions. What are your biggest fears? And why can you not get your head around buying Bitcoin? Maybe you have. Maybe you've reallocated out of real estate and bought Bitcoin. Who knows? Anyway, I'd like to leave you with the fact that I believe, and using the lens that Peter Thiel writes about, which is from 0 to 1, Bitcoin is a 0 to 1 innovation. And so when you're buying a piece of the network that's the future base layer of global value, it's an extraordinary opportunity in comparison to buying another piece of real estate in a government's jurisdiction that frankly falls to pieces over time. Thank you so much for listening. Reach out if I can help.